So Audre Lorde said, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those women who still define the master's house as their only source of support." So I love what Shoshana said, because of course, building our own house, that's what we're doing here. I'm going to introduce Judith Rosenbaum, who is the CEO of the Jewish Women's Archive. I'm not going to give you her background because you all received her bio, but I am going to say she is incredibly brilliant, and you're going to really learn a lot about feminism and the patriarchy and all the things that we know a lot about already. She knows even more about. So I'm very excited to bring up Judith Rosenbaum. Rachel, are we going to be spotlit or not? It's okay if not. Oh, yes, we are. Okay. Hi. Great. All right. So hi, Judith.
Hi, Jamie. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. This is really such a fabulous group. It's an honor. It's an honor to be
Thank you for agreeing to be here, and I'm really happy. Judith and I have wanted to do something together for a while, and this is what we're doing. So this is great. So the topic today, right? Dismantling institutional and organizational hierarchies, and what could it mean if we broke apart the system that's patriarchal, right? So let's just start though with, what is feminist leadership? What do you got?
Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts about that. I will say as a caveat that those thoughts are always evolving and changing, and really I do my best thinking in conversation. So I'm sure I'll be, inspired by things that you and others say today to continually adapt my thoughts. I also want to say before I begin that anything I say about what feminist leadership or, talents that women bring to the table I don't speak from an essentialist position around that. I don't think women are better than men. I don't think our differences stem from our chromosomes or our bodies. I think they stem from our experiences living as women, and we have an incredible array of resources that are often not identified as worthy, that we should be lifting up and drawing on. So as I was thinking about this in preparation for today, I had a few different kind of components that I want to bring up. And this comes from my understanding of feminism as, something that is rooted in analyzing systems of power and oppression with particular attention to gender, but not exclusive attention to gender, and with a goal of creating a more just and equitable world. And I think it's really important to stress the collective aspect, that feminism is not an individual act. It's about understanding systems and our place within them. So that's why this is such an important and great conversation. So, I would say, first of all, feminist leadership starts with centering women and other marginalized people and their voices and experiences. And I think we can't overestimate how transformational that is. It's not just that it adds new voices to the conversation, it literally changes the whole story and how we see everything. So without that, we are just going to be replicating. We're really using the master's tools, because the master's tools is the stories and voices that we value before. The collective piece is really the collective orientation, the awareness of ourselves as part of a larger whole. This is why I do women's history, and this is why I think history is so important, because we have to understand how our own individual stories are part of building a larger story. And so leading with that larger sense of the collective goal of justice and equity always in mind. The third piece, I would say, is about redefining authority and where it comes from. In patriarchy, so much of authority and power stems from fear and violence and control. In the big, picture, in the small picture, it might stem from being taller or louder or hairier or whatever things we might associate with that, right? And I want to just say, this is really hard to unlearn, right? Even for feminists, sometimes we have to remind ourselves, oh, right, we have to maybe change what our view of what charisma is, of what authority is. Some of that is about understanding for example, vulnerability as a resource for authority, right? And we can talk more about that and about what it means to kind of bring your whole self to leadership. And then I guess the last, well, maybe this isn't the last piece. I think I have two more things to say. Sorry if I'm going on for too long here, but well, there's
go,
so
go.
much.
It's great.
I think a careful and nuanced attention to power, right? Which means challenging power structures even as you're participating in them, which we all do. That's what makes that Audre Lorde piece so tricky, is we don't always, it's very hard to figure out which are the tools that are not the master's tools. And sometimes we think we have tools that are not the master's tools, and then we discover actually they have been co-opted by the master, right? So figuring out how we share power, but also own our own power. And I think this is a really interesting part of feminist leadership right now, where there are women in control of things who have to recognize, like I know I struggle sometimes when my colleagues might sometimes treat me as the man, right? And I'm like, I'm not the man. And then I'm like, okay, well, in some ways, I guess maybe I am, right? In relationship to them in some ways. So it's about like owning your own power, but also sharing it and recognizing that giving up power requires acknowledging when you have it in the first place. So that's not easy. And finally, I would say the last piece that I think is so important, and this will be obvious to all of you because it's part of what you're doing together, but feminist leadership is leadership that helps cultivate other people's leadership. So it's not just about holding it for yourself and building it up for yourself, but really thinking about how is leadership a process that generates something beyond something for yourself. So I'll start with that big mess of ideas.
Yeah. Did I say she's brilliant? Yes, she's brilliant, clearly. So, we talk about women's leadership here and women leaders, and I'm been talking a lot in the last year with everyone about using the term feminist, and you and I didn't discuss this, but okay, let's go here. So the idea of what is feminism, what is feminist leadership, and I totally agree that it's not just, first of all, it's not just about women, right? It's that all humans have the right to equal access to self-actualization and raising their families and health and all of the things and safety. But I still struggle when I have to convince someone that we need to use the word feminist because it is inclusive, and I don't like the term necessarily women and all marginalized populations, which is a term that, things change so fast. I've only been here 5.5 years, and I have already, I used to say that all the time, women and marginalized populations. Now I'm like, no. The populations aren't marginalized. They have been treated in a specific way. And if we look at them as marginalized, then it's like putting a stigma, right? I do think that there's language that is evolving, but feminism, the word, seems to go back and forth. And oh God, the patriarchy just entered my mind when I said, oh, that's in my mind. I didn't say this out loud until right now. That's just such a woman thing, right? Back and forth. But in fact, that's because women do, I believe women look at things differently. We turn them around. We have a very large responsibility for the future. And so we take things and we look at them from different angles. And yeah, I think that can come across as wishy-washy to some people, or flip-flopping. We've heard that in our government, in our electoral races, right? And I've always thought, what's wrong with that? Why don't we want a leader who can think of things from two different directions, right? So what do you think we need to do? They're going to talk in their breakout rooms about how we're going to break down the patriarchy together. But what do you think we need to do the opposite, to just lift up women and others who deserve to be lifted up just because they live, just because they're here and they exist, in order to everybody get on the same-ish page around feminism and leaders and leadership?
Wow, you ask really, really big questions. I think part of it is really, and maybe this is too internal a process, but it's where my head is today. And this is like an existential ongoing challenge, right? Like it's realizing that how things are is not how they have to be. That's the first piece, I think, right? It's how to create a different vision, and one that, and this gets back maybe to my first point about like, when you include the voices of people who haven't been included, that is way more possible. But, you know, like I'm thinking, for example, of that famous thing that RBG said when someone said, when will, you know, how many will enough be for women on the Supreme Court? And she said, when there are 9, which for so many people, you know, struck them as it was jarring, right? Because we don't think of it as like, oh, we're trying to, you know, replace all male leaders with female leaders or something. But what she was pointing out is that, you know, equity doesn't mean equal numbers. And also we've so internalized an idea that it is normal for there to be way more men in leadership that it seems, you know, unnatural or like an overcompensation to say when there are 9. And so I think, you know, I think part of it is like pushing ourselves in those ways that might initially feel uncomfortable. I encounter this also a lot with, I get a lot of questions around Me Too kinds of stuff around, well, what happens to the men who have been, you know, who have been perpetrators and then, you know, apologize, and we need to have a system for reintegrating them. And of course, in the long haul, we need to have a system, right, for how we move forward. But I am so not there yet, because I feel like we give women who have been victimized like 1 second of our attention, and then our attention, because that's how we've been trained, turns back to, but what's happening to the poor men who have lost their jobs and have lost their, you know, livelihood and have lost their community. And of course, you know, leadership involves compassion, and it involves thinking about all of the people in the community. But I think there's a lot of work we need to do to really think about, why is it that our attention so often goes to a place of worrying about the people that we have been taught to worry about all along? And how do we reorient ourselves and catch ourselves in those moments so that we can, I think we're going to have to do some overcompensating for a while to fight against those impulses, to let our sort of what we think of as our instincts be drawn back to men and other people in power as being the ones who deserve our gaze, our attention, our concern. So that's a beginning of an answer, I think, from me.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, I have a son, and he says things to me like, oh my God, how am I going to live? I'm a white man and nobody's going to blah, nobody, right? And I say to him, really? Because that's pretty much how we've lived for generations after generations after generations. So if you have to give up something now in order to make sure that other people get something, then that's just the way it is. It's like, I'm going to, you know, you give up half of your Thanksgiving dinner so that other people can eat, right? These are the things that happen. And I think people really get stuck on that idea that if someone's asking me to give something up, like it's a zero-sum game, right? It's not. Right? Leaders, men who are leaders, there are great men who are leaders. There are men who are feminist leaders, and you know, we love them alongside all the others. And I think that they're not asked the same kinds of questions we are. But more importantly to me is this idea about why we turn our gaze. Like, I know it's historical that we turn our gaze, but when I think about it and I catch myself doing it, I know it's conditioning, right? It's just like intention and impact. We've learned a lot in the last, 18 months to 2 years about intention and impact, and how you can have the best of intentions, but if you've done something that hurts me, then it's impactful in a specific way. And that's more important than what you intended all along. So I'm just thinking about that in terms of feminism, and in terms of the swinging, what's that thing that swings? going to all the way over to the pendulum. Thank you. I'm thinking about the pendulum and how far it swings and how uncomfortable we are when it goes over there, when we certainly were not uncomfortable with 9 men on the court, right? I mean, some people were, but in general, we weren't. So when everybody goes into breakout rooms in a couple minutes, they're going to talk about how visionary leaders, whether they be people who actually run organizations or people who support organizations, how they can work together to create a more equitable world, right? Not equal necessarily, but equitable. And how can the two bodies of humans work together in order to further, so we framed the question originally about like, how can we smash the patriarchy together? But really, what does that mean? Like, it's really about how can we work together to further the feminist theories and feminist leadership so that everybody is sitting around the same table and that we all have, equal access to all the things that we need to have.
Right. I mean, and I think part of it is, as going back to your question about sort of the language of feminism or using certain terms, and some of it is about it's about pushing, it's about discomfort, it's about naming, like I think about, sometimes when we talk about feminist leadership, we talk about some changes that now have become fairly mainstream, right? Like the idea of being able to bring your whole self to work, right? To acknowledge and to recognize that in other people and not to compartmentalize, right? There are plenty of male leadership gurus who are talking about those kinds of things now. Annoyingly, they don't credit feminism with bringing some of those ideas into the mainstream. And I think that is a huge loss and erasure. So some of it is about being able to hold on to that language and challenge what people's associations might be with it and expand it, recognize it doesn't mean one thing, and you can debate what it means, and you can also feel uncomfortable with it from various different angles and kind of push the meaning of it in various ways, which I think is really important. And I think also part of what you were talking about, this question of like, do we say our goal is to smash the patriarchy, or do we define it in smaller ways? And I think that tension feels really productive to me in some way, because part of, I think, what is so hard about leadership is recognizing that social change takes a lot of time, and it's going to be incremental. And that doesn't mean that we lose sight of the bigger picture. Like, we have to have that big radical goal. And we also have to be able to sit in the middle of it, recognize like we are going to be in that uncomfortable place of what my dear friend and teacher, Rabbi Sharon Cohen-Anisfeld, calls paradigm shift fatigue, right? Like, we're in the middle of a lot of paradigm shifts. We're not there yet. So we're in the middle of it. And it's exhausting to be constantly trying to uncolonize your mind and uncolonize the world. And right, all those things take time, and they're tiring, and they are confusing. And I think a lot of this work is just giving voice to that and recognizing that for people, sort of giving people permission to feel tired and frustrated and name those things, and also recognize there's loss in that. Like, the world, I think the process of social change is probably easier if you believe that there is one key. I study social movements. So, and part of what I've noticed in studying this history is that pretty much every social movement historically has operated with the idea that there is one key. And if we turn that key, all the other things will be fixed, right? So, it might be that, if we, are a communist and we think if we end capitalism, all the other problems go away. We don't have to worry about women. We don't have to worry about race. We don't have to, like, all those problems will be fixed. We're kind of coming to understand that's not true. And there's loss involved in that. It would be much easier if we could work on one thing and that would fix everything else. And sometimes I wish that were the case. And sometimes it's overwhelming to think about all the other pieces. And we have to acknowledge that and like allow there to be a little grief that it's really friggin' hard. And then be like, okay. And we have each other and we pick it up and we carry our grief with us. And we recognize that we're not going to get all the way there, but we're not going to lose sight of the fact that that is the goal.
Absolutely. One of the things I when we went into the pandemic, I used to always say, bring your full self to work. And I've changed it to be bring your best self to work because the pandemic has opened us all up to a lot of scrutiny in our homes and in everything. I mean, we've even seen gender harassment and abuse virtually. Like, whoever thought that could happen? But in fact, it is happening, and it's happening in our community also. And I agree. I don't think we're good with being uncomfortable. I'm not good with being uncomfortable. Like, I want to know the solution, and then I want to put in place. And JWFY focuses on social change. Like, we're identifying leaders who do social change, and yet they're the ones that are struggling and burning out in my opinion, at a higher rate, because when you give socks or meals or whatever to homeless people, you feel immediate, there's like that immediate serotonin thing. But when you're inch by inch by inch moving the needle, and then it goes back, and then inch by inch by inch, it is exhausting. And I agree. I mean, obviously I agree that supporting women is the only way through this. Like, that is the only way we're going to get to the other side of that. And when I say, I don't just mean only women, but that's who we support here, and that's who we engage with.